Okay, so this is Geoff Stone. I'm here with Lawrence Ben Eliezer. He's a Toronto criminal lawyer. We're here to talk about a few issues. First of all, I'll just ask you, Lawrence, to just tell our listeners a little bit about yourself.
Well, first, thanks for having me on, Geoff. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm a criminal defense lawyer. I was called to the bar of the Supreme Court of Ontario, as it was then known, in March of 1989. I've been practicing in courts throughout Ontario since that time. I've appeared at every level of court, including the Court of Appeal. I've practiced primarily in the area of criminal defense work, with a lot of emphasis on defending men against charges of domestic assault, sexual assault, the usual litany of things that men are accused of when relationships crumble. And that's what I'm about. I also do some civil litigation, and I'm fairly adamant about protecting my clients' interests so that the legal system should function as it should.
Now, I've heard you mention before opposition to a idea or a set of ideas that you call victims' rights, and I've heard of this before, and I've had my own thoughts about it. But I just want to know what you think are the main problems with this concept or this movement of victims' rights.
Well, first, I'm not the one who calls it victims' rights. It's public advocacy groups. It's lobbyist groups, government officials, police officers, crowns, and so forth, calling it victims' rights. The legal system as we know it now in Canada, with particular reference to the criminal justice system, has evolved over the past 800 years or so. It started in England and then made its way over here, and it really developed in response to a need to stop people from settling their own differences, so that if Party A poached an elk on Party B's property or somehow offended B, B couldn't come back and set the first guy's house on fire and kill his family without fear of further retribution. So what happened is that the king stepped in, and you had the notion of his or her majesty's courts, depending on who the monarch of the day is. And so in civil proceedings, in civil litigation, it's always the plaintiff and the defendant. Whoever was hit in the motor vehicle accident suing whoever hit him. In criminal litigation, and that's a litigation between two private individuals. Criminal litigation is the accused against Her Majesty the Queen, and should Prince Charles ever ascend to the throne, it'll be His Majesty the King, assuming we continue to be part of the Dominion.
But why do we bother
part
with
of the Commonwealth?
Why do we bother with that tradition, given that we can't actually have the Queen or the King there, present, involved? Why do we use that as a template to follow?
Because when we say Her Majesty the Queen, that is a euphemism for the Canadian public. So that Her Majesty, because a breach of the criminal law is a breach of the public peace, of the peace of the realm. So it is of Her Majesty's domain. That is the legal theory, and so therefore, effectively, it pits the people of Canada against the accused. Same as in the States, you'll see the state of Utah against Jones, or the people of the United States against Jones. It's the public that is the victim. In civil litigation, the plaintiff puts himself or herself forward as the victim of a civil wrong, car accident, fraud, you name it, breach of contract, well, not breach of contract, but you get the point. In criminal litigation, and it is litigation, it is the true victim is the Canadian public, not the person who is alleged to have been hit or the person who is alleged to have had his or her property damaged or stolen. It is you and me and the rest of the Canadian public. So what happened, because of the politicization of the criminal justice system, through reference to completely untested and since then demonstrably false data, is victims' rights groups came up. And ironically, through women's rights groups, so-called, and I'm not sure what women's rights are. I know what human rights are. I don't know what women's rights are. Ironically, what these groups did, and I've called them feminazis before, and that's what they are in some cases, in many cases. Ironically, what they did is, as part of their claim to equality, notionally, they've asked the state to protect them against the evil of men, the male gender, which is more than a little ironic in my view, because if you're saying, I am equal to you, why am I coming to you for protection? Why do I need to be protected? And so these victims' rights groups arose, and they're pushing a completely, not only nonsensical party line, but a dangerous one.
And I'd say also probably very regressive, because this type of justice is more like a vigilante justice. It's less impersonal. It's about revenge, and also it's about protection and provision for women only, which is sort of a old-fashioned idea.
I don't know that I would go so far as to call it revenge or regressive. I think it is regressive in a sense. And I don't know that revenge is the key, although, certainly in my experience, one of the areas in which men are most vulnerable is when a relationship is breaking down, particularly a marriage. A woman, given the institutionalized acceptance of this notion of victims' rights, all she has to do is pick up the phone. It triggers a response from the police. If there's an arrest, the man is thrown out of the house immediately, which provides her with an enormous tactical advantage if there is divorce litigation going on. And I had a client who found himself arrested more than once on the eve of an important appearance in family court, where he was going to make strong progress in obtaining increased access and maybe even custody of the children. But every time the court date would approach, she would call the police and accuse him of something else. We eventually got to trial, and the judge rightly found that she simply could not be believed, that this woman's evidence was pure fantasy. So that's what we see, and the notion of victims' rights pushes that along and creates a very dangerous environment.
Would you say it also pushes the criminal procedures to be more like the civil procedures, where you have someone claims to be a victim, now I deserve to be compensated somehow, this person has victimized me, therefore they owe me something, or the government owes me something, or somebody owes me something?
I haven't seen a lot of that in the criminal litigation process, but of course in the divorce, in the family courts, we see that all the time. We see allegations of sexual abuse being made against the husband as the wife tries to leverage her way into increased support. And we see it all the time. And unfortunately, lawyers push that along because every side, a lawyer's not in a position to say most of the time whether what the client is telling them is true or false. You just push your client's point of view. But the system is designed to give credence to these allegations, and because everyone is afraid of being sued if they're wrong, they err on the side of what they believe is caution, which is to keep the man away from his children, keep the man away from his family, allow his standard of living to fall through the ground, to and then beneath the ground, while her standard of living doesn't suffer nearly as much. That said, we do need to recognize, Geoff, that there are men who abuse their relationship partners, who beat them, who assault them sexually, who don't pay their fair share of child support and spousal support, who behave completely irresponsibly. I'm not suggesting that that there are no men who do this. To the contrary, the prisons are full of men who have beaten their relationship partners, and that's as it should be. But what we need to start pushing back against is the notion that men are inherently evil, and that women, that the default position is that women need protection from men, because of course the data shows, the verified data shows that women are more or less as likely to instigate domestic violence as men. So the notion that men are inherently evil and women are inherently good is pure nonsense, and we need to push back against that.
And just like with anything else, you need perspective. So, it's a good thing to be safe, but how safe is safe enough, right? Just because there's a chance that something could happen, just because it happened once, doesn't mean we should make a law to prevent that from happening ever again in all circumstances without having a good way to really tell what the odds are, or really.
One of the first things we're taught in law school is that bad facts make bad law. You're right. Just because something happens once, generally speaking, doesn't deserve a law. But if that one-off event is a massive toxic spill into the water supply, you might want to take a look at regulations or laws designed to tighten things up and prevent that from happening again. The pushback by the legal system, again, is to create laws. It's reflex. But, and of course, a large part of it is punishment. People complaining that the courts are light and they're soft on crime and so on and so on. The problem is this. If we are to be able to continue to claim living in a free and democratic society, our criminal justice system can only be about risk management, not the elimination of risk. There is nothing that can be done to prevent, to 100% certainty, the abuse of women by men other than killing all men. That way you've eliminated that gender. There is no way that a male could abuse a female.
Whether that be physically, sexually.
In any way, emotionally, it doesn't really matter. We're in risk management. A free and democratic society is in the risk management business. So, what that says is we are willing to accept a risk of harm in order to live freely and in order to deal fairly with each other. So, I'm willing to take a chance that when I go out into the street after this interview is done, I'm willing to take a chance that I'm going to be robbed or who knows what, assaulted, as the price to pay for the police not bothering me. I'm willing to take that risk and for the police to not bother others. So you're in, as I say, you're in risk management. But in the area of domestic violence, we did for a long time move way past risk management and into an area of complete hysteria over this issue. Thankfully, in the more recent past, things have changed. The playing field is leveling out as we see the beginnings of a recognition that things aren't as bad as the feminazis painted them to be, and that the reference points that were used to justify policy implementation are false. Discredited studies, things that aren't even close to being peer-reviewed or scientific, articles that appear in Psychology Today. I was talking to a friend of mine recently. The lengths to which these intellectually dishonest individuals will go to push the anti-male ideology is are astounding. Those lengths are astounding. They just ignore anything that points away from their worldview and gladly embrace anything at all, clutch at any straw.
I think that has something to do with the way they view their worldview itself is very much an us versus them, as in terms of two groups of people at war, right? And they feel like anything is justified if it helps their side win.
I don't have a problem with an us versus them mentality, us against them. It's where I live. Mm-hmm. My entire professional life is based on working in an adversarial system of one kind or another, whether it be civil or criminal. I have no problem with that. What I have a problem with is when the rules become unfair or they're not applied fairly. That's what causes me a headache. That's what causes me to be very, very careful when I go into court and defend one of these guys. Because I know that depending on the nature of the case, what's really in play is that my client is presumed guilty until he's proven guilty. And that I need to prove innocence, which is completely contrary to one of the more fundamental principles of our legal system, the presumption of innocence.
What do you think the victims' rights movement has done to the presumption of innocence, if anything?
I won't say that it's destroyed it, but it's definitely put it into ICU. It's really a disgusting system in that sense. They complain, the complainants in criminal proceedings and organizations representing them, like victims' rights groups, complain that they're being ignored and that they should have a say in the criminal justice system. Well, no, they shouldn't. I have nothing for these people within the legal system. I'm sorry if somebody got beaten up or whatever, or sexually assaulted, but within the confines of the legal system, there's no room for them, because it damages the integrity of the system. Criminal litigation is based on reason and evidence and procedural fairness. And to inject the concept of victims' rights, to create a victim-based theory of criminal justice, does irreparable harm to that. Imagine if we take it out of criminal justice, if we say, okay, let's forget that, and let's now apply the same principles to civil litigation. So Jones is driving his car, and he stops at a red light, and he gets hit from behind by Smith, who does considerable damage to the car and to Jones, who ends up hospitalized and has serious injuries. Would anyone reasonably say that the injured party, that driver number one, should be able to determine just how much money he gets? No. You'd say absolutely not. You have a judge in the middle with no interest in the case who says, okay, first of all, let's figure out what happened. Next, once we figured out what happened, is this a tort? Did somebody do something that's actionable? If so, what are the injuries and what are they worth in damages? But all of that is determined through evidence put before an impartial trier of fact. But that's not the way these so-called victims' rights groups operate. They say, we don't trust the system. We don't trust judges.
Right.
We want to be able to determine. And when they, what punishment an accused gets. And by the way, when they say, no, we don't, and a lot of these groups do, they say, no, we don't want to determine the punishment. We just want to be consulted. Take that with a gigantic salt lick, because in my mind, that's just an out-and-out lie. That's not what they want. They want to control the process. As a matter of legal theory, they should have absolutely no say in it. None. Victim impact statements. I've seen a lot of them over the years.
Do you think there's any benefit to them?
No. I think a fair-minded judge will look at it and, from a human standpoint, say, I'm sorry that you've suffered this, because I found the accused guilty, and I'm sorry that you've suffered this. But as far as its value for sentencing, limited at best. I've seen victim impact statements where the only thing the so-called victim didn't ask for is to have the accused burned at the stake. It's ridiculous. That's not what I signed up for.
Do you think a victim should have any more rights than anyone else?
Okay, there's no such thing. A complainant They're
Right.
just a witness in my books. When I approach a criminal trial, my first position, and my only position, is that it's just a witness, not a victim, but a complainant. Just a witness, nothing more than that.
That's how the victim rights idea destroys the presumption of innocence.
Exactly.
Right there. If you have two categories, victims versus what? Well, criminals, right? So you already know you have a victim.
Exactly.
You already know you have a criminal. What's the point of a trial? What's the point of a system?
And my second position is that the evidence of that complainant should be approached with a great deal of care and skepticism because of the presumption of innocence. I have to protect my client's rights, and I can't do that if my default position is, oh, this poor victim, oh, yes, this poor victim. No. My position is this is a witness, a complainant, and I'm going to test her evidence. That's my job, and I'm going to do it. I will do it fairly. I will do it in accordance with the rules. I will do it with common decency. Unless, of course, the complainant starts to play games in the box, in the witness box, in which case I still play by the rules. I just don't do it very nicely. So that's a thing that's variable. So, but yeah, I don't believe in victims' rights. I just don't believe in it. If they want to get therapy, if they want to propose that they sit across from the accused in a room and hash it out, regardless of what happens in the criminal proceedings, to just talk it out and see if there's something to be salvaged as far as healing, or I'm all for that. That's fine. Go get therapy. I'm all for the public funding of it. No issues there. But don't bring it into the criminal justice system. It's pollution, as far as I'm concerned. It's toxic.
I have heard an idea in the media a bit and from various people that supposing someone is really a victim, and perhaps one thing that they might want or might need would be this knowledge that justice has been done for their particular case, that the person who victimized them has been punished. Do you think that's something that a victim should have for their own benefit?
They don't get justice. They're not the victim.
Right.
They're not the victim. They're not entitled to justice.
It's not personal.
It's not personal. It's the Canadian public. Now, the public is entitled to justice. And part of justice is fair punishment. No question.
And part of that would be deterrence too, right? Because it's not so much about revenge, but about preventing victims.
Sentencing has a number of objectives, one of which is retribution, or as you call it, revenge. But there's general deterrence, so that like-minded individuals don't engage in that conduct. Right. There's specific deterrence, so that this accused doesn't come back before the courts. There's, as I said, retribution.
Even revenge is a primitive form of deterrence, right?
Well, yeah, but that's why retribution is in there. There's rehabilitation, which is to make, help it along, and denunciation, so that the Canadian public, not Jane Doe, who says that she got slapped around, but the Canadian public is going to denounce the conduct through sentencing. Those are the major objectives, and those are set right out in the criminal code and have been developed over centuries and centuries worth of case law. But these groups, these lobbyists, who are in many cases thoroughly unqualified to speak on the matter, they don't care about centuries worth of thought, of intelligence, of logic, they don't care.
Experimentation.
They have their say. And who are the faces of these groups? People who have been subjected to that misconduct. And we're not only talking about women who have been abused, we're talking about men who have been abused. Theo Fleury, the hockey player, he's got these victims' rights groups. Forget it. Go get yourself some therapy. You want to offer the accused an opportunity to face you so that you can yell at him and tell him how you feel and tell him how much damage he's done to you? By all means.
Have a baseball bat and a pillow?
No.
No?
No, that gets back to the original point. The system is designed to prevent that. But if you
no, I mean a pillow as in like, not, like some object you take your frustration out on as.
No, but
Anyway.
the way that you painted it, it's like either he'd beat him to death or smother him.
No. I mean, to sometimes there are therapies that involve acting out aggression, but on,
No, I'm talking about actually confronting the accused,
Okay.
and saying, this is what you did to me. You had no right to do it. You've damaged me. You've caused me enormous grief in my life. I can't deal with relationships. I can't do this. I can't do that. I can't do the other thing. And those are legitimate complaints. That happens a lot. And people who have been sexually abused, by the way, I think the first phone call should be to the police. Everyone has the right to their sexual integrity. Everyone. But none of that yelling at the accused for therapeutic purposes belongs in the criminal justice system. Our legal system, again, is based on rules, on evidence, on reasoning, on the presumption of innocence, and on a disinterested, independent, impartial tribunal who has no skin in the game. The judge is there to do their job, his or her job. That's it. Let them do their jobs, let them apply the law, and all this yammering and nattering and shrieking in the public square has to stop or be stopped, because we were headed down an incredibly dangerous road. Now it looks like, with decades of evidence coming out and discrediting this notion of the inherent evil of men, it looks like we're getting better. It looks like we may actually be moving back to a system of reason, to the way that it should work. That's what I'm hoping for. And you need to keep working. Groups like yours need to keep working for it.
What do you think can be done? I've heard you say that we need to get organized. We need to get our act together.
Yes.
What do you think are one or two things that we could do to get more organized?
First order of business is communication. Find out who else is in your camp. So do some scouting. There must be other groups out there, but they're probably meeting in basements, 3 or 4 people at a time. What I would look at, in a very serious way, is how women did it. How did they get themselves organized? Whether it's suffragettes to get the vote, or getting ridiculous things like victim witness impact coordinators. How did they get themselves organized? Numbers. 3 or 4 at a time, you're not getting anywhere. 30 or 40,000 at a time, now you've got something. Half the world's population is men. Where are they? How have you not taken the steps that are so obvious? Talk to each other. Figure out what you want. Bring experts on board so that when you speak authoritatively, and you cannot be accused of relying on some high school research paper to get the Supreme Court of Canada, or some university research paper to get the Supreme Court of Canada to conclude that an enormous percentage of mentally disabled people in general, and women in particular, are sexually abused. Speak authoritatively. And there are lots of people out there who are on your side. Use the media. Barbara Kay. She is one of the most powerful advocates for men's rights you could possibly have. And ironically, I talk about men's rights, and yet I'm not sure what they are either. I think we need to stop calling it men's rights.
Absolutely.
Call it human rights. Call it people's rights. Call it whatever.
Well, one thing about calling it men's rights in the past is it gets people's attention. They think, wait a minute, I never even considered that. always been talking about women's rights. Wait a minute, is there another side? What do you
Well,
mean?
that's the point.
Mhm.
When you say men's rights, the women say, well, men are inherently evil. Whereas it seems to me, if you say, we're all about human rights.
Yeah.
No one deserves to be beaten. No one deserves to be sexually assaulted. No one deserves to be emotionally abused. And no one deserves to be treated unfairly by the criminal justice system. Or put in positive terms, everyone deserves fair treatment under the law. And if you, feminazis, want to categorize yourselves as women's rights and narrow the focus that way, you go right ahead. I'm going to take a broader view of things. And here's my list of papers and data and empirically verifiable information showing why you're wrong and why this whole thing is nonsense. I think that's how you get there. Is it going to happen tomorrow? Nope. Not a chance. Is it ever going to happen? Not if you keep going like this.
You know, one thing I think about people in general is that it's hard to sway them if you can't convince them that their interest is involved. And I think one thing that these women's groups, radical feminists, have done is they've convinced a lot of women and some men that their interest is somehow involved in one side, in the sense that it's men versus women.
I agree.
And anyone who takes it's very easy to sort of deflate that position if you, I think, appeal to, the basic goals of life and, how life works. Obviously, a war with the sexes sounds like we're all used to war and tribes coming to conflict throughout history, and we understand that perspective. Your family first and foremost, right? Your tribe first and foremost, your country, your religion, your whatever, your group that you belong to. But to separate the sexes in that way, it makes no sense.
I think it's easy, or let's put it this way, it's not easy, but easier than one might think, to tell men, if you don't want to end up in a basement apartment with a one-burner stove, cooking macaroni and cheese for dinner, while your soon-to-be ex-wife is essentially living the same way that she did before she kicked you out of the house. If you don't want to be in handcuffs based on flimsy evidence, then you will support my campaign for human rights.
And also say to women, if you don't want this to happen to your son or your new husband, or that sort of thing too.
To women, I mean, why wouldn't you say, well, don't you want to behave fairly? Don't you want to be honest in your life? Is this something you really want to see happen to your neighbor, to your brother, to your nephew? Not your new husband, because that's what it's going to happen to. But what about your nephew? What about your son? What about your brother? What about your father? Do you want to see that happen to them? Or do you want to take a look at what can be done?
Yeah. What I meant by new husbands, sort of like, the second wives, there's a problem with, the new husband has to pay his old ex-wife X amount.
I know. But you need, like you say, you need to appeal to people's self-interest.
Yeah.
But you do it, it seems to me, by saying it's in everyone's interest, it's in the public interest to do this. If you can improve your society by doing this and knock out unfairness. And it's time that we started to push back. It's time that we started to call nonsense, to use a polite phrase, and just say, I'm not going to accept what you're telling me just because you're saying it. I want to see. Inherently untrustworthy people, like politicians, have been feeding us these lines for decades, and too many people have swallowed them whole. People who are in positions of real power, politicians, cops, so forth, should be approached with great caution and treated with healthy skepticism. Otherwise, we're giving away the story.
All right. Well, it's been a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you.
Have you back on soon.
Look forward to it.